morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session, which is episode 3 of the VMA digital series. I'm really pleased to say that this is the highest number of registrations that we've had for a VMA digital series to date. So there's obviously a lot of interest in this topic and something that people are grappling with around the industry and looking for some assistance and tools and ideas to help resolve. So we're thrilled to have you all join us for this important presentation. What we're talking about today is the science of crowds, creating safe and enjoyable experiences. And as venue professionals, we all know that ensuring both safety and enjoyment for attendees is at the core of a successful event management. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by a friend and colleague of mine, Tony Nicol, from Arup. He's a seasoned expert in crowd management and safety planning. But before we get into the session today, I'd just like to introduce myself. For those who don't know me, my name is Michael Roberts. Again, I'm an associate with Arup and also an IVSS instructor, hence the shirt and the background, as well as the next chair of the Institute of Venue Safety and Security program run by the Venue Management Association. It's a privilege to be here with you today, and I want to briefly touch on why crowd safety is such a critical topic in this industry. In today's world, large events are more complex and dynamic than ever before, and whether it's a concert, a sporting event, a major public gathering, understanding the science of crowd management and ensuring the safety of both guests and staff has never been more important. The strategies and insights shared by Tony today will help guide us in creating environments where safety and enjoyment go hand in hand, which is essential not only for attendee satisfaction, but for overall operational success of our events and venues. I'll hand over to Tony now. He's worked extensively with crowd safety specialists and collaborated with various organisations to ensure the safe and smooth delivery of large-scale events. He's a transport planner and crowd modeller and has a Master of Science in Transport Engineering and Planning and a Master of Science in Crowd Safety and Risk Analysis. He works with multidisciplinary teams, including risk, crowd management, user experience, pedestrian modelling, safety, security and emergency management experts to deliver exceptional event experiences for a range of clients, including Venues New South Wales, Sydney Showgrounds, Melbourne Cricket Club and City of Melbourne. With his years of experience, he brings invaluable expertise on the tools, techniques and strategies that are crucial for optimising crowd safety. Tony, over to you.
Thanks, Michael. And hello, everyone. I'll just get my screen sorted and share my slides. Just, can you...
Yep, got it.
So, yeah, thanks for the introduction, Michael. And good morning to everyone, and welcome to the Science of Crowds, creating safe and enjoyable experiences. Today, we will explore the fascinating dynamics of crowds and how we can leverage this understanding to design environments that are both safe and enjoyable for everyone. In this presentation, I'll cover some of the fundamentals of crowd science, crowd dynamics and crowd behavior, and I've interspersed many videos, so I'll apologize for that in advance. Hopefully the bandwidth that you've got is capable to see the videos. We've also interspersed some of the work we've done, particularly using crowd modelling to help venues and event planners across Australia and internationally. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll have a good understanding or a deeper understanding of the science of crowds.
Just in terms of questions, Tony,
Yep.
There's a Q&A chat function at the bottom of your screen on the menu bar. If you have any questions as you go and you think of them, you can put them in there and we'll deal with them at the end. So I'll let Tony get through his presentation and then either during the presentation, plonk your questions into the chat or, into the Q&A function or add them at the end of Tony's session.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. There is a small section where I do ask for people to contribute. So as Michael says, use the Q&A. It's all anonymized, so we can field the questions at the very end. So my name is Tony Nicol. I'm a people movement specialist at Arup. I've lived and spent most of my career in the UK, more specifically in Manchester. So some of the stuff that I'll be talking about today specifically links to the work that I've done there. I've lived and also work that I've done since I've moved to Sydney in the last 3 or so years. My background is actually in wider transport planning, so I've got a good understanding of the macro scale of transport planning and how it interfaces at a micro level at events and venues. But one of the, so after I did the Masters in Transport Engineering and Planning, as I say, I specialised in transport planning, but over COVID, I did a Masters in Crowd Safety and Risk Analysis, and it was a Masters that was curated by Keith Still. Some of you on this call will have met Keith, will have worked with Keith, and will know some of the theories and principles. So I'll go through some of that in a bit more detail a bit later. But effectively, it changed the trajectory of my personal career and how I view crowds. Lots of my theories and insights I'll discuss today come from that course in particular. Unfortunately, it's no longer available. It was an online course, and I was part of the last cohort to do that Masters. But there's many other courses and there's lots of training that I know people across the industry provide, certainly within Australia and globally. I've worked with crowds and in events for the last 7 or 8 years. So some of the experience I'll be talking about is a bit more recent. But one of the events that I went to on the 2nd of July in 2005, I didn't know at the time. Hopefully you can see that video. I was part of probably the most perfect crowd wave that you're ever likely to see. So it was a little known artist called Oasis that were playing at the City of Manchester Stadium. And just as they were coming onto the stage, a crowd wave formed, a perfect crowd wave formed from the back of the field, or towards the back of the field, towards the front of stage area. The resultant force broke the barrier, and I think my understanding is changed how people view the role of barriers more generally at some of these types of concerts and events. One of the more interesting elements for me is that on the day I did not have a ticket, I managed to get a ticket through a friend. And the ticket itself was in a restricted view area in a seated area in the lower bowl. And when myself and friends went to go to our seats, we noticed that there was nobody in and around our area. And the security guard was letting people onto the pitch. And he seemingly let tens, if not hundreds of people onto the pitch. So when we talk about crowd science, we're going to talk a lot about crowd density. And I think the actions of maybe some of those individuals from a security perspective or some of the staffing perspective, letting people onto the pitch that did not have a ticket to be onto the pitch, probably was a contributing factor to what you saw on screen. What ensued after it was a great concert. So the balance between safety and providing an enhanced experience is very small. It's a very balanced environment. So some of what I'll show you today is much about the experience as it is about the safety and the science that supports it. So crowds as a science, the concept stems from work undertaken by Keith Still. So he's released 2 books. I fundamentally, one of the, I still read the book. I've got it on my desk here. See it? Applied Crowd Science. I still read that reasonably regularly. Even though I've done the Masters, it has loads and loads of useful tips and tricks for people that work in the industry to plan for crowds. So Keith developed the theory, and he defines crowd science as the how, the where, the why the crowds form and move above a critical density of more than 1 person per square meter. So the elements of geometry, so it's the area, distance, and capacity, the dynamics of a crowd in terms of the density, the flow rates, and the psychology of the crowd, they all combine to make the science work as one, as part of a crowd. And really understanding those components is incredibly important to understanding how you plan to keep your patrons and your crowd safe and having a good time. So crowd density is generally measured in people per square meter. I just want to do a bit of a shout out to Alan Wilson, who is based in Perth. He's developing some interesting theory about using hexagons to measure people from a density and a flow perspective. It's really interesting work, so I encourage you to go and look at his LinkedIn profile to see some of the content that he's producing. But from a generalized perspective, people per square meter is a standardized unit, which is used across the industry for crowd management and safety guidelines. Frequently, lots of crowd disasters occur due to overcrowding and in poorly designed systems. You'll hear me say systems quite a lot. I look at systems, I look at events and venues from a systems perspective, how people flow and move and stand and watch and wait and do things in that space is really important to see how things fit together. I just want to share this video on the left-hand side. Some of you will have heard of the Notting Hill Carnival, approximately 1 to 2 million people for the festival, on-street festival, attend every year in August. And I find this video incredibly fascinating for many, many reasons, but it shows you the force of a crowd when you get too many people in that crowd and what it can do. You can see at the bottom of the screen, the fence is really struggling to cope with the pressure. You've got somebody stood on a fence itself. You've got the police who are in there in their high vis. They are completely out of control. They cannot do much in that instance. You've got lanes forming. There's all sorts of crowd science going on here, and density is a key part of how we look at crowds, how we design spaces, and what we consider to be safe and fun. Because from a personal perspective, I don't consider that to be a fun environment, and I would imagine for the event planners, it's not a fun event to be managing. There may be some people on this call that have worked on this event, so if you have, feel free to drop any comments into the Q&A box in terms of your own personal experience. So I mentioned this earlier. It would be good to get thoughts of everyone on the call that is involved with designing spaces, designing events, and considering what a safe maximum crowd density would be. So if you consider that static and moving crowd density provide different limits and risks, if crowd science defines the how, the where, the why crowds form, how do you define what a safe maximum crowd density to design your system or space to? So if you don't mind providing what you would consider to be a safe maximum crowd density from a numerical perspective, or any other approach that you take to do that. If there's any reference material that you use, it'd be really interesting to hear what reference material that you use to define some of the planning that you do, in particular around if I have a certain space, what is the maximum crowd density I can fit in that space? And just while you're doing that, I'll just talk through some of the resource guides that I've personally used and is used across the industry. And it would be one of the main documents that we use within the industry is the Guide to Safety at Sports Grounds. It's also commonly referred to as the Green Guide. I was surprised when I came to Australia how frequently that document is used. It has no legal standing in the UK, never mind Australia, but the document itself is a fantastic document with lots and lots of very interesting information to use to help event planners and venues design spaces to keep people safe and, as I say, having a good experience. It's a really interesting document because it has key metrics that we use and I'll discuss later for evacuation. So lots of people use flow rates from that document. There's information around crowd density and things like that. So it's a very useful guide. There is, from my perspective, on a personal level, I think there's an opportunity within Australia to have or take control of a guide which is used across Australia. You might want to call it the Green and Gold Guide. I think having something like that would be incredibly important, but it is important to note that the Green Guide is supported in the UK by the Sports Advisory Group, who ensure the safety of people who are attending events at stadiums. So just using the guide in isolation is completely appropriate, but the context in the UK is that it has a whole framework supporting it from a safety perspective. So it's always useful to keep that in mind for using such reference material as Australia. I've also showed that there's other guides there. There's the Yellow Book, the Purple Guide, and also Building Code of Australia. I use these in different forms for different purposes, and really interesting that there's reference material. So the importance that academia plays in in crowd science is very, very, very important. There's some really interesting work that's done across the industry by people such as Milad Haghani, who's based in University of Melbourne. I also encourage you to look at his LinkedIn and look at some of his content that he produces in and around crowd safety. It's really interesting, the empirical work that he does from an academic perspective. The role, I guess one of the case studies that I've picked out of why I think it's important, it came out recently, and it was to do specifically to do the San Fermin Festival in Pamplona, which as you can see on the bottom left hand part of the screen, is to do with bull running. It's a historical cultural event that occurs annually, and researchers spent 3 years looking at one of the civic squares where the bull run starts, and I think they get something like 12,500, 13,000 people in this particular civic square, where they monitored crowds reaching 9 people per square meter. And I don't know if people are putting that into the Q&A in terms of that's how you design a space, but you probably find very few events that would actually design a space up to 9 people per square meter. The actual numbers are less important than the actual findings. They found that crowds actually became quite predictable at higher densities, creating things called oscillations or chiral oscillations, and I'll show you on the next screen. And why it's important to event planners and venues is that those types of behaviors and the fluidity of a crowd and how it responds gives insights into potentially where your crowd is reaching very high density levels. What is also very interesting for this festival is the culture of the event, what people expect when they turn up to the event. People expect, if they go to the Civic Square at the start of the festival, that it's going to be very busy. So always thinking of those things and thinking of a bull run. If you were going to do your risk assessment, Michael, I would assume you would not put risk putting bull running and high densities towards the top of a good event. But what you do get in parts of the world is you do get things that have been built up over years and people accept them. And it's not to say that people feel uncomfortable in density, but it's something that certainly does play a part in what makes an event successful. So hopefully you can see this video. So chiral oscillation effectively acts in sort of a circular motion, as I understand. So they used head tracking technology to track individuals to show how fluidly the crowd moved at 6, 7, 8, 9 people per square meter. And it's entirely fascinating. It's actually quite hypnotic as a video to watch that happening. There's potentially not many events that operate across Australia at this sort of level of density, but it's useful for those that work in crowd safety to really understand what some of the triggers are, tipping points are, and where some of those predictable elements are occurring, and how effectively you manage them, because there's a lot of work that goes into crowd management and crowd safety, and sometimes at some events crowd density can go higher than what you'd like it to. So when you're doing your real-time observations and monitoring, observing these types of behaviors and the science in action is really important to note. So crowd behaviors are dynamic. The psychology of a crowd is incredibly important. And on the left-hand side, you'll see a fire in a crowd, which was for lots of work that I do on a personal level with colleagues at Arup and working with venues across New South Wales and across Australia. We actually do a lot of evacuation modeling in the event of a fire. So when I saw this, I think it was in 2021, Phoenix, Arizona, Slipknot were doing a concert, and patrons decided to start their own fire, dance around it, jump on top of it. And for me, it's really interesting in that the experience that people were looking for in that moment was very extreme, and it just highlights the dynamic nature of crowd behavior and how the psychology of a crowd can fundamentally alter your risk profile of an event. I think the actual concert itself was stopped for a period of time while emergency services came, but as you can imagine, for some people, they probably had a great time, but I would imagine for a lot of people, it's not fun to be in that environment. It's very risky, and as you can see, lots of people are taking videos. What is interesting as well, people are not going anywhere. People are not panicking. People are not fleeing, and panic is a word that gets used a lot in evacuations and extreme situations. But this was a very unique situation. Or potentially not. This was something that I saw recently on LinkedIn and social media. Very similar environment, and it was a band called System of a Down playing a song called Toxicity, which is a great song. And you can see there people have put flares in, and flares seem to be ever present across the industry: football games, soccer games, sports games, and music events, and these sort of theories that developed by academia are really important to understand how people behave in such circumstances. And there's been work done by Professor John Jury and Anne Templeton in the UK. Again, I encourage you to go and seek out uh, their um, some of their work. They've delved deeper into a theory called social identity rather than anonymity, or shared social identity rather than anonymity. The theory around shared social identity focuses on how individuals in a crowd perceive themselves as part of a larger group rather than isolated individuals. This sense of shared identity leads to behaviors that align with the norms and values of the group. People in such crowds often self-police and act in ways that support the group goals and well-being, especially if they feel a sense of unity or a common cause. And that's what you can see on the screen there. You can see people behaving in ways that they probably wouldn't do under normal circumstances, but the social norms in this instance mean that they think yeah, that's part of the entertainment and their experience for that event, and it is very interesting. And understanding the crowd. So this is something I saw recently. It's one of the great things about working in events. There's always things that are cropping up and on a daily basis. And this was a Billie Eilish concert at the Unity Arena in Norway. I think it was only 2 or 3 weeks ago. Again, I saw it on social media. And it was a controlled ingress. I know there's been problems in the past with patrons running into a venue or an event, and there being issues with slip, trips, and falls, or if not worse, in terms of crowd crushes. And this was a very well organized crowd management procedure that was put in place to try what I assume, and it's just an assumption, is to assume that running behavior to stop. As you can see, it happened close to the barrier at the front of the stage, but I imagine it's something that the arena and the venue did itself just to try and limit the risk associated with some of those crowd behaviors. So I'll just take you through some of the work that we do at Arup more generally around shaping enjoyable experiences and how it's intrinsically linked to crowd science. So the emotional and psychological and physical experience are shaped in various different ways. So we do a lot of work in and around crowd flow, ease of access to things like toilets. Toilets are generally an issue at venues for various different reasons. Access to food and beverage, access to exits, in particular during an emergency evacuation, and how they are crucial for a positive experience. Challenges for venues and events are around long queues, bottlenecks, excessive crowding, and it can lead to frustration, and it can affect the reputation of your venue in terms of how people enjoy the experience when they go. So we work a lot with venues to try and improve the conditions for those sorts of issues that may be prevalent, or for lots of the work we do, we actually do it in the design stage. So for new venues and for new events, so we try and look through where we can improve things even before they've happened. So crowd modeling is one of the approaches that we take to look at the core concepts, and as best we can, we try and link it to some of the science that I've described earlier on in the webinar today. So crowd modeling is a computational technique used to simulate and analyze the movement and behavior of large groups of people. You can also get large groups or smaller groups of people in smaller spaces, and it's really a scalable approach. It combines principles from physics, sociology, and computer science to to try and project how crowds will react in various scenarios, such as evacuations during ingress and during egress. At Arup, we're really fortunate that 25 years ago, we developed our own software called Mass Motion. It's commercially available that we use to do a lot of our pedestrian modeling and crowd modeling. We use it a lot for design and operations, again, looking at crowd flow, event layout, geometry, and staffing levels. The agents, as you can see, we call them agents. The little people within the model are what I call unintelligent entities. So we need to work with venues and event planners to make them intelligent. So again, lots of the stuff I've described and lots of the stuff I will describe for the latter half of this presentation is our attempt to make them intelligent. But one of the things, and I guess it's a bit of a challenge to the industry, is how can we make our models even better through empirical evidence on after every event for every venue that has an event. There's a rich set of data that you do collect. You scan a ticket, you have transactional purchases, people go to the cloakroom. How long do these things take? How do people respond and react in certain circumstances? In order for us to do our crowd modeling, the more empirical evidence we have, the better. So that's where we work with venues and operators to try and make our models as intelligent and the agents within them to be as intelligent as they can be. So one of the applications where in my time in the UK used crowd modeling was in and around crowd density, and I don't tend to use mass motion or crowd modeling too often for crowd density. But there was a project that we were getting involved in just prior to final completion of the construction, and the whole financial model and business model that was created was based on 2,200 people in the stalls. And for a standing event, we did the calculations to determine that potentially was too many people. So on the left-hand side, you can see quite dark red colors appearing, which indicates that the venue had the potential to go above 5 people per square meter if they wanted 2,200 to sell 2,200 tickets for people to go into the stalls. Now, we didn't necessarily tell them that they had to bring that down. It's part of the risk assessment. Lots of the work that Michael does around risk assessments look at events and individually, and look at the audience profile, look at the demographics, look at the real some of the interesting things that make up the crowd and what experience that they want. So we did do a piece of work to say, well, if you did go down to a few hundred people, down to 1,700 people, what does the density look like? So it was a really useful exercise for the client to understand what a crowd density could look like if they had a fully sold out event, front of stage, focus, band on stage, DJ on stage. What could that look like? And for them, potentially going above 5 people per square meter was a bit too high. Lots of the work that we do in crowd modeling is actually evacuation modeling. I just want to do a bit of a shout out to Johnny Naufal at Venues New South Wales and his colleagues. We work a lot with them, and we work across a lot of their stadiums, in particular for concerts, sometimes sporting mode, but mostly for concerts. And they work with people like Glenn Rainsbury. So just another shout out to Glenn Rainsbury at Live Nation for allowing us to show and share the model on the left-hand side of the screen, which we did towards the end of last year, November last year, for the Coldplay concert at the Accor Stadium. So venues, we work very closely with venues who work very closely with Live Nation to do to use our modeling to help define some of the key parameters for the concert. And one of the first conversations we tend to have is in around the field of play population. So we work with the venues to understand what are the evacuation routes, what's the capacity, what the flow rates are, and how can we get people out as quickly as we can do, more importantly, as safely as we can do. But the interesting component to me with that is, as we understand what population you could get on the pitch and how quickly you could get them off the pitch in the event of a full evacuation, it also has an overlay of experience. The higher the density, it has a tangible impact on the experience that people have. For certain events, certainly people are happy to go at very higher levels. For some other events, potentially a lower level. So there is that experiential element to it. Crowd modeling is very powerful in this context. It helps to define the parameters for the evacuation. So we do use the Green Guide for this. There's metrics within the Green Guide in and around evacuating a full evacuation to a place of reasonable safety within 8 minutes. So that is one of the criteria that we do use, and I think it's generally used across the industry. And that helps to shape a lot of the work. Interestingly for us, I know for this concert and other concerts that we were doing last year, Venues New South Wales did use our database outputs in terms of a visualization to help train staff to help them understand what their roles and responsibilities were in the event of an evacuation. So the virtual environment, or working in a virtual environment, is very powerful for event planners, really, to help not just define some of the core parameters, as I say, such as the ticket selling, the population on the pitch, and so on and so forth, but actually for training, which is a really interesting use of crowd modeling outputs. And this is an interesting piece of work. I wasn't personally involved in this, but I saw colleagues did this in at a major stadium in the UK, and the stadium itself was suffering from lost revenue, as they call it. When halftime started, a crowd would appear at the 12 points of service, and what they noticed was people peeling off before or just before they've reached the front of the queue, because the queue extended for an excessive amount of time. And what effectively that was doing was people were leaving the queue before they'd even purchased a drink or food and going back to the seat to make sure they didn't miss any of the game. So the piece of work that Arup did was to go to the stadium, look at peel-off rates. So as you can see on the image, on the video itself, you've got the white people in queue, you've got the green people who've been served, and the red people or agents that effectively are choosing to go back to their seat because they've run out of time before the game has started. They wanted to understand, if they went from 12 points of service and enhanced the food and beverage offer to have 18 points of service, how much revenue could they make? And conversely or inversely, what would be the lost revenue if they stayed with 12? So it was an interesting piece of work. Even if you just take the numerical aspects out of it, you can see how the queue is much better organized on the right hand side of the screen. So it's a really interesting use of crowd modeling and how it can support the commercial side of venues. But also, again, just linking back to the experience, nobody really wants to stand in a queue too long. People have a tolerance for these sorts of things. And there's been various studies being done around that. So expecting people to queue for best part of 15 minutes for food and drink is probably a bit excessive. So yeah, it was just an interesting piece of work. So the last crowd modeling project or piece of work that I'm just going to talk through now was, for me, it was quite an interesting one. Again, it was a theatre, this time in the north of England, in a place called Stockton-on-Tees. A capacity of less than 5,000 people. The primary focus for the work actually was ingress. And after the venue opened, they found that they had excessive queuing, as you can see on screen there, for people getting in. And so they wanted to look at different strategies to get people in quickly. So there's certainly an experiential element to that, but there's also a really safety and security aspect to this. So the queue extended quite far through the place where the venue was itself, and lots of the queue were you would consider to be unprotected. There was minimal hostile vehicle mitigation, and that for lots of venues in the UK is now a big problem. There's new legislation. People may have heard of Martin's Law. It's also known as the Terrorism Protection of Premises Act 2025. So that's just gone through the Houses of Parliament. And now that mandates that those responsible for public premises and events in the UK implement measures to reduce vulnerability to terrorist attacks. So that came off what happened well, probably multiple incidents that happened in UK and internationally, but more specifically at the Manchester Arena. So for the work that we do in Australia, it's really, really, really important that we take things like that incredibly seriously. Thinking about how patrons get to your venue, pre and post event outside your venue, and some of those things like how can you keep people protected? How can you keep people safe? For some venues, similar types of ingress issues or egress issues might be prevalent. So it's just something that the industry within Australia needs to be fully aware of from an international precedent perspective. And I just want to wrap up this presentation with this wonderful video drone footage of the Lady Gaga concert in the Copacabana beach recently in the last few days, 2+ million people. By looking at the reports, the local police thwarted a bomb threat. I think there was plans potentially in place to bomb this particular event. So yeah, you can imagine the devastation that would have caused. But fundamentally, it's phenomenal that events of this scale occur. I believe that the organisers want to do one a year for the next 4 years. So it'd be interesting to see if they could beat Rod Stewart's record of something like 3.5 million. If you go and look at images of that, it's just mind-boggling to think that 3.5 million people could go to a singular event. So that finishes up my presentation today. Hopefully you found elements of it interesting and insightful, and maybe gives you some things to think about when you plan for your future events. So yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Tony. How do you want to approach the density discussion? Do you want to have a look at the Q&A and share your views, or do you want me to share the ideas from the group with you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've gone through them. I don't know how many comments we got.
Yeah, so we've had a few. So there was reference to Professor Steele's approach and a 2.7 packs per square meter as the limit. Another comment that 3 persons per square meter is the plan that organisation plans to, and then reference to the Fruin level of service density, which I'm not familiar with, but you may be, for
Yeah,
transport planning. So,
yeah.
do you have any comments around those ideas?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because you look. I mean, I go back to the Green Guide. The Green Guide has a whole table of different densities depending on the different types of events that you might be planning for. I think it goes upwards of. I think somebody's commented 4.7, maybe one of them. Yeah, I think it goes upwards of 4.7 people per meter square, and then down to 3.3, then down to 2, down to 1.4. I think Keith really highlighted the relationship of static crowd densities and moving crowd density. It's really important to think of a space not just from a static perspective. So if you have your square, how many people can you fit within that square? But it's also how many people can you move out of that square into another square or into another box, as it were. We had an interesting call with one of our clients recently, and I think our view of one of the events that we were looking at was the crowd density looked reasonable, but they mentioned that, well, actually they really struggled to get the emergency services in there, and there was an incident, and they needed to get emergency services into to deal with the incident. And so the determination of what is acceptable as a crowd density is very contextual. You might get a different density at a Lady Gaga show on Copacabana Beach to I don't know, a vintage fair in Sydney somewhere, and it depends on what the context is and what ultimately what you want your patrons to experience. Sometimes there's benefits in going lower to have that more premium experience. Sometimes some events do go a little bit higher and it's got a bit more energy and intensity to it. I've worked on events where there's been an expectations that patrons will want to do various things at high levels of densities, but you give them that space to move into. And I think it's just really good planning when those sorts of concepts are built into a plan. So it's a very complex. It's a very complex topic, in my opinion, and I think that Notting Hill Carnival video shows it, in particular in very unconstrained environments. If you've got a street event such as the Notting Hill Carnival, we have the Mardi Gras in Sydney, and it's very difficult to actually manage people into a certain space, and you do rely on behaviours in those sort of circumstances to make sure that they do self-police and they do behave in a certain way. Sometimes I think I mentioned at one point, it's just a bit of a balancing act, really, between what constitutes a safe density to what constitutes a good experience. It depends on your audience profile. It depends on maybe a little bit on demographics. I've read reports saying they were a young crowd, but they were well behaved, and the implication is a younger crowd and maybe potentially less well behaved than an older crowd. But we've all been at events and we can see that sometimes older crowds are not that well behaved. So I'm maybe going around a little bit. It's I think that using the guides, purple guide, yellow guide, or yellow book, and green guide, and the national codes is really important to like frame why you do certain thing, but really looking into the context of your event is as important as a number itself.
There's a comment here in relation to the video showing, particularly the concert videos, not showing a certain D in the front of the stages. Is that relatively new development in terms of design for concerts? And can you comment a little bit about the importance of that overlay design aspect to support crowd management strategies for concerts?
Yeah, it's I mean, people on this call might know better than myself. I was very young at this time and I wasn't working in the events industry, but I think the incident that occurred at the Oasis concert in 2005, so it's almost 20 years old now, was one of the tipping points for looking at those sorts of barrier, like change in barrier formations. And if you go to concerts now, there's all different types of stage arrangements and barrier formations, and there's lots more work that's being done to it. So I think at some point, probably from then or maybe before then, because there were, I think at the turn of the century, various incidents that occurred. These sort of concepts started to be brought into the planning for an event. So yeah, the sort of that D sort of barrier setup and mid barrier setups and things like that. And there's yeah, I think different events now have different stage layouts, which are very, very different to just your standardized sort of like front of stage type of impact that you have and you saw for Oasis. So yeah, I think that the industry is constantly evolving with the best information that they've got, and I think us being as a cohort of people and the work that I do and working with the people such as yourself, Michael, and others in the industry, seeing when things potentially go wrong can give us some pointers what to do in future. And yeah, I think that near miss at Oasis probably was probably one of the tipping points for maybe looking at barrier formations in maybe a much more robust way, shall I say.
Yeah, and I think in the Australian context, the big day out, the death of the patron at the front of the mosh pit there in the 90s drove a lot of the evolution of crowd safety at events also. There's a question here, how can professionals in Australia make a positive impact on crowd safety for events overseas in less organised, but usually or potentially busier events?
Yeah,
Are
it's
there
an
global forums for sharing knowledge and information and training and those sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, you probably know better than myself in terms of the forum aspect. It's not I'm not as immersed in the industry as potentially yourself and others. I do think forums, even just on a national level, are incredibly important to share the knowledge of what good looks like and what potentially less good looks like, and slightly worse than that. I think on a training perspective, I know there's various sort of training courses that I've done across the industry. I noticed that Roderick van Gelder's put a comment in there. I know he actually teaches training courses, and he uses a lot of key stills content. But there's also other training courses out there up to level 5 accreditation. So it's important that there's a good diversity within the training courses. In my opinion, you've got really good people who've got really good experience in the room to really help those that are new to the industry, or maybe those that have been in the industry for a while, to understand the interface between what I would do, what you would do, Michael, and then all the other stuff as well. Because all the stuff I've talked about today, it's multi-layered, and it needs lots of voices in the room to sort of shape that sort of conversation and that understanding of how you plan for crowds. I think it's really important that you do have those people with that expertise to disseminate that that experience. As I say, unfortunately, that course that Keith was doing at Manchester Metropolitan University is no longer in existence. But there's various other courses in the UK. You could do them online. So I don't know what they are, all of them off the top of my head, but I'm sure if people wanted to do a bit of research, they should be able to find them reasonably easily enough.
And in terms of international collaboration, I'll remind everyone the Venue Management Association is Asia Pacific, so certainly for our region, the VMA is a great opportunity to, if you participate in the learning and development programs, these sorts of webinars and others, that's an opportunity to connect with people around the region, share knowledge and experiences, and build those networks to help you hopefully support other players around our region, but also to learn from them and benefit from their experience as well in terms of things that they've dealt with. And I'll talk more about the Institute of Venue Safety and Security and what we do there a bit later on. Question about consideration of the genre or expected crowd behaviour when calculating a density. So a Slipknot concert, for example, when compared to, and this is my addition to this, an Andrea Bocelli crowd, for example.
Yeah, I mean, two very different examples. I think what I'm always trying to show with those videos, if you have that evidence at your disposal in terms of Slipknot are touring and this is what the fans are doing. I think it was 2021, and I don't know if there was any sort of COVID blowback in terms of that post-lockdown type of behavior. I know there's certain people within the industry think that behaviors have changed, and it became more challenging to manage an event. But I think certainly the profile of your crowd's very interesting. I think I touched on it before. I've seen through reading various documents, crowds tend to be characterized a lot by the age, and I think that is an oversimplification really of how people behave, because an Andrea Bocelli crowd might be actually quite disorderly because it's the cranky and past the bedtime when it comes to egress. But you might get I don't know, who have you got coming up? We got Oasis coming up later this year, and yeah, there'll be lots of work done for an Oasis crowd, and Oasis crowd, if it's the same crowd that was in 2005, they're a bit older now, but they might use it as an opportunity to have a bit of fun. So the demographics of a crowd, the profile of the crowds is very important. It's a bit of a dark art, really. I think some of the promoters who work globally will have a lot of thoughts about what they see from their crowds, but there's also cultural things as well. And I think the sort of the tolerance on maybe crowd density might be different in certain parts of the world, and maybe even parts of Asia. The on a daily basis, if you think of countries like Japan and things like that, they maybe tolerate higher levels of density compared to what we have in Australia. So if you have quite a diverse cultural crowd, then what does that mean for crowd density? So it's thinking of all those sorts of things. And as the comment says, a highly active crowd. If you think your crowd's going to be highly active, then you might do your risk assessment and determine that they're going to want to group and have a bit of fun and run around and run into each other and do what they do. But having space for people to stand away into might be the one of the elements that you look at trying to ameliorate that type of uniform crowd density, which might be too high if people feel like they can't get that breathing space. So yeah, the risk assessment is very important when it comes to crowd density and understanding your crowd.
Question here related to Brisbane 2032 and what sorts of issues in crowd planning should be used to prepare for now that may be different to typical sporting events in the Olympic
Yeah,
context.
yeah, quite interesting. I know you've got a lot of experience around Olympics, some more recent as well. Yeah, I think that type of major and mega event is quite different to a lot of what I've shown today, albeit some of the components and the fundamentals are still very similar. Um, it's crowd flow, it's experience, and it's getting people in and around various different precincts in a safe and enjoyable manner. But the thing is within Olympics that the experience is, and you probably know a lot more than me, Michael, it's very high on the they want people to go and have a good experience. So when venue designers and engineers and architects and all those sorts of things will be designing their venues to around the experience, and certainly the safety and security will be a very big part of that. So how should you be preparing? I think you prepare like you would do for most events, and as I say, the fundamental components are the same. It's just your expectation of your crowd's very different. It might be a bit more family friendly. It might be that people want to go from one venue to another very quickly. So how do you enable that? The transport planning element to it is very interesting, because yeah, the likes of Paris was very easy to get around, and Brisbane is a bit more disparate and geographically spread. So how you condition your crowd in that environment is very important, and hoping and planning in a way, or planning in a way that doesn't result in crowd frustration and maybe little things occurring around that is really important. So your fundamentals of moving people in and around precincts is very important. But because you're going to have a lot of venues close together, the sort of the intricacy of that is going to be very interesting, and just how you get people. You're going to have venues with different schedules as well. You're going to have basketball finishing at the same time, netball starting. So crowd flow is very important for that type of event. So yeah, it probably takes a lot of the typical elements you take from a sporting event, and but at a much well, it's at a mega level really. They don't come much bigger than an Olympics really.
That's right. I mean, there's several world championships all at the same time. And some of the key, I mean, typically for Olympic Games, most of the spectators do come from the host country. But the difference is there's this additional overlay, the Olympic overlay that comes with it, that means that while someone attending, a spectator may be familiar with the venue they're attending in a business as usual transport and crowd management arrangement, there's all this additional stuff that comes with the games that they won't be familiar with. So you almost have to treat those spectators like new spectators every time. You'd also do have the international component, so people with English as a second language and no familiarity of Australian systems, venues, transport, etc. So planning for those as well is important. I agree, it's a celebratory environment, so you need to create that environment and encourage that, but also be prepared for changes to the environment in the lead up to the event. So, for example, in Paris last year, the tension around the Middle East and Israel playing a North African football team in the football competition resulted in significant civil unrest, invasions of the pitch at a match, and for a subsequent match in Paris, a very significant policing and security overlay around that venue to address the particular issues in relation to the challenges with that match. So there needs to be some flexibility built in as well to deal with whatever's occurring at the time of the games. And that's the hard thing now, is trying to predict what will be happening in 2032 from an overall security environmental perspective, but also any potential issues around crowd management and challenges that may come with that as well.
Yeah, I was just one thing I would add to that. I'm surprised I've got all the way through and not even really mentioned the weather. We know that weather's very changeable these days, shall we say, and extreme weather can have an impact on your event. It's one of those aspects of planning which is really difficult, but also it's probably one of the more, I guess, one of the more frequent risks that could come up. Talk about security and things like that. And there's a lot of work that will go into it for the likes of the Olympics. But if you had your venues, you had vast open spaces, and an electrical storm came through or severe weather event, how would you get people from one place to another? And it might be a shelter-in-place procedure that you enact. So the sheer volume of people that are going to be at the Olympics is, as I say, it'll be much bigger than certainly has probably gone on in Queensland historically. So how you keep people safe from the weather potentially is really interesting thing to think about. And as an industry, being as rigorous and robust on things like that is incredibly important. And a lot of the components are very similar to security, but they're also quite different because people might respond to uh, uh, those types of risks in different ways as well. The difference between an extreme heat is different to maybe like a lightning storm that comes through. So yeah.
Okay. We've probably got time just for one more quick question, probably a minute or so answer, Tony. There's a question about stairs and probably broadening that out, your comments around accessibility and considerations for crowd management planning.
Yeah, stairs are certainly an interesting one. When we do the evacuation work for Venues New South Wales, at the Core Stadium and other stadiums, we always try and they're almost an option of last resort. I've seen it. Went to Paul McCartney concert and watching people walk up the stairs after an event it was very slow. It was very slow. It was laboured, and it was the age of the audience was quite high, I think. So stairs are actually a really important element for many parts of venues. So they can be a constraint. They can be a bit of an issue. As I say, the one of the things that the Green Guide has is a flow rate for level surfaces, but also stepped surfaces. Definitely a call out to the industry to really understand their own flow rates within their own venues. Really, have you, if venues could come forward and say, right, we know for certain types of events and with an older demographic or a younger demographic or a less mobile one, or I don't know, for the range of audiences that they have, capturing flow rates upstairs is really, really important. Just to say, and it might form part of the wider event planning for future events. Could you get, for certain events, potentially, could you get people through your stairs quicker than others? Some of them might be slower. That empirical evidence is incredibly important, really, not just for myself, but for everyone, really, to make sure that people can move in and around the space as efficiently as what they can do. So yeah, stairs are a really, really important factor. Escalators as well, and lifts, and all those sort of vertical transportation elements.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Tony, and thank you for your insightful session today. We'll have to wrap it there. There's still a couple of questions outstanding, so we'll follow up directly with those who've asked those questions. If today's session has sparked your interest in elevating your expertise in venue safety and security, I'd like you to invite you to explore the Institute of Venue Safety and Security program. It is a comprehensive 2-year training initiative providing tools, resources, and real-world applications you need to enhance safety, improve operational efficiency, and effectively manage risks at your venue, including crowd management, by the way, from global experts in the area. It's a 2 one-week residential programs covering 25 safety and security specific subjects, all taught by industry experts. There's quarterly town halls that you have access to with your cohort, as well as venue application projects to implement your learnings directly in your workplace. The program also includes venue and site visits, which are incredibly informative as well, with a range of venues in Sydney. So thank you very much. I appreciate your engagement, and I hope you got some benefit out of today's webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.